Hello and welcome back to the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Peter Houston, and in this podcast, Esther Thorpe, Chris Sutcliffe and I are exploring the people and products powering publishing, both through the podcast and in our adjacent weekly newsletter, which you can sign up for at voices.media. The Publisher Podcast Awards are open for entries until the 14th of March. Go to publisherpodcast.com for categories and more information. We're delighted to have Memberful as sponsors for this season of the Publisher Podcast. Memberful is a powerful membership solution that lets you offer membership perks and exclusive content to your loyal audience, giving you full control over who has access to your articles, your newsletters, and your podcast episodes. Take control of your publishing business this year with Memberful. Visit memberful.com/publisherpod. That's memberful.com/publisherpod to get started with a free trial. This week on the Publisher Podcast, I'm talking to Reader Revenue Royalty, the CEO of Hearst UK, Katie Vanneck Smith. Katie's career spans the Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Tortoise Media, and in the 2 years since she's joined Hearst, the company has launched and revamped membership programs for Elle, Good Housekeeping, Men's Health and Women's Health, and soon Prima and Runner's World. Katie and I spoke about subscriptions versus memberships, the importance of publishing teams, the future of print, and I asked her what's the point of industry associations as she takes up her role as the chair of the PPA. But my first question was, is she a little bit sad to not be part of the Tortoise Observer deal?
No, not really. I'm really proud of them, actually. If I had to say what's the overarching emotion I feel, I just feel a huge sense of pride. Because who would have thought the the entrepreneurial startup, buying the 18th century stalwart in the Observer. So I think it's great. I think it's also, I really hope it works because I think it's exciting, it's different, and it's innovative, and that's what we need in the industry, full stop, really.
I think the complications on that one for me are not on the Tortoise side, they're on the Observer side and how the Observer plays that and all the rest of it.
Tell me what you think.
I think, in a way, there's a play there to remove the Sunday print so that the Guardian's got somewhere to go with weekend print in the future. So if the Guardian ever stopped doing a daily print, it would have space in the weekend.
Yeah, but I think the opportunity for the Observer is more like the Atlantic and the Spectator. So I think if you look at the gap in the market, I think the UK is underserved in brilliant print reads. Whereas the US has got the New Yorker, it's got New York Magazine, it's got the Atlantic. And the Atlantic has done a brilliant job, right, in the last sort of couple of years. So I'm excited because the Tortoise team are obviously, there's a number of individuals inside Tortoise who grew up themselves in newspapers. Not just James, but the design lead is a guy called John Hill, who worked at the Telegraph, worked at the Times. And I think when they get their hands on that print edition of the Observer, I'm really excited to see what they make. Because I think a really brilliant, like you've said for the Guardian, the opportunity to have a weekend edition of the Guardian is brilliant, right? And this is great, I think, for the Observer brand. I mean, the Guardian can't produce two brands. I mean, if you think about all the other daily newspapers, they were united by name, even though the Times and Sunday Times were totally competitive with each other. At least they were both called the Times, And so the Guardian, really, of the quality dailies in the United Kingdom, they're the only ones who had that kind of disconnect between their daily and Sunday. The Mail, the Times, the Telegraph, all the others were 7-day in their DNA, even if they didn't feel like 7-day inside the building.
From my point of view, anything that extends the runway for print has got to be a good thing. Has to be.
Well, you've got to stop talking it down, Peter, because the runway for print, that sort of language worries me. Because, look, consumers are ultimately the people who will decide whether the joy of a physical product is something that is part of their media, diet. I think we talk ourselves into some of this stuff.
I'd agree with that. I'm going to come back to print at Hearst towards the end of what we're talking about. But my first question, subscriptions and membership. To people on the street, they might not automatically get their head around the difference. As one of the undisputed queens of subscriptions and membership, what's the difference? What are we talking about there?
I try and oversimplify things because I like to make sure my mum understands them. So I think about subscriptions quite simply as a transactional relationship. You subscribe to something, it's an ongoing payment that you set up. Whereas membership doesn't have to have payment at the heart of it. Being a member of something is a much more an emotional proposition, right?
Yeah.
You belong. And it's not just the act of joining something. It's actually you probably have an emotional affinity to the club or the community that you are a member of, whether that's from a golf club through to a membership of Good Housekeeping. There is a connection with that brand and with the community that you join that, I subscribe to get my washing up liquid delivered to my house, and I definitely don't have an emotional relationship with my washing up liquid. Maybe I should, but I don't. But I subscribe, and I subscribe because it's easy. I make a saving. There's a financial sort of reward in a way. You get a discount because you subscribe, right? But you also get it, so it's a convenience thing. Whereas a membership is, fundamentally, I think, about that act of belonging or the joy of being part of something. Join us rather than get a saving.
I like that emotional idea. One of the things that I've noticed, we talked about this a little bit, you've named each of these memberships in a different way. And I think it reflects the community that you're trying to serve. So L is the collective, Men's Health is the squad, and Good Housekeeping has got that VIP label. How do you go about figuring out how are you going to call these things what you end up calling them?
So I think there's it's a great question, but I think take a step back. I think there's almost a bigger business strategy question at play there, which is the thing that was true for us before digital disruption, when we were just magazines in the printed edition, was that as a portfolio company, the economies of scale meant that we did exactly the same thing and all brands sort of rose. So we all sort of benefit from the same supply chain. We had the same business models. We had circulation, we had advertising. And the strength of these companies was built on this portfolio. And when I turned up at Hearst, we were definitely operating like a branded house. I mean, on the wall it says, "Welcome to House of Hearst."
Yeah.
Right? And we are actually called House of Hearst, the building. And actually, the single biggest insight, I think, as you look at the brands in the portfolio, is the strategy cannot be one size fits all. Because actually, all of the things that were true for being a portfolio in the physical print edition are actually fundamentally false when you then start to think about how you deal with an omni-channel brand. And actually, all of the expressions of the brand are very different depending on the brand, because the customers and the audiences of those brands fundamentally value that brand for different things and look for them, and they are different. And so it's really an expression of, I would just say, 101 basic marketing, which is the audiences are different, the brands are different. When I worked in newspapers, I created Times Plus as one of the first, as you'll remember, one of the first.
Oh, so it's your fault that everything's called Plus.
So I was just going to say to you, Peter, that's the example of a legacy that I've left in my old world. So we created Culture Plus in 2006. It became Times Plus in 2007. And it was the precursor to building the paywalls and the digital subscription space, which we rolled out in 2010 on the Times. But the reality of Plus is actually a generic. And it has actually, to your point, become quite a generic as people have thought about how they build out these digital subscriptions or memberships. But for me, they talk to the fact that real membership isn't one size fits all, but Plus is a one size fits all proposition. So interestingly, when you then, and I love the fact you've noticed this, Peter. Thank you for noticing. When you look at, our different brands. Yes, we have, Men's Health Squad, we have L Collective, we have Good Housekeeping VIP. We'll launch Runners World Club next month, and all of the brands will have a very different proposition. We're not going to build the technology 16 times.
No.
The expression of the brand and the membership for the audiences will feel different and unique. And I don't get to name them. That's the job of the editors with their portfolio directors and marketeers. But I love the fact that, magazines have in their DNA that passion, that connection with their audiences that enables us to build real memberships and not have to create something called Plus as the sort of bolt on to enable it.
So you arrived at House of Hearst. Was Hearst just waiting on you? Because Esther in particular has said, well, you've got to ask Katie, was Hearst late to the party on the membership thing?
I think magazines in general were less disrupted, right? And, by digital, right? And so some of the headwinds that the news industry that I grew up in sort of dealt with in the early noughties, which meant that by our teenage years in the sort of 2010 through to 2015, you saw that move towards digital subscriptions, and magazines were not seeing some of the disruption around convenience, right? Because the digital ecosystem did disrupt the sort of daily habits before it sort of disrupted monthly passion habits. And social media obviously sort of developed later. So I think that if you're comparing it to news, yes, magazines are late. But if you're taking magazines as their own sort of part of the publishing and media ecosystem, I don't think Hearst is particularly late. I think there had been a few attempts and tests. Even in Hearst, I think we did women's and men's health before I arrived. Actually,
right.
It's quite a lot different now because we've taken the lessons of those early tests and sort of developed better propositions over the last couple of years. Grazia had a beauty proposition, Vogue, had a test over here, but it wasn't something that you felt the magazine industry had lent into, and it was like every brand is looking at membership and digital paid for propositions. And I think that's the thing I would say about membership. Membership doesn't necessarily mean that every form of membership has to be paid for. You could be a member of a cosmopolitan club, for example, and that could be a data exchange in its basic format, and you can still belong to something. So were we late to the membership and digital subscriptions party? Yes, when you compare us to the newspaper industry. And we often get put together, don't we? Magazines, news and magazines sort of becomes the sort of terminology. But within magazines itself, no. But I do think that the magazine industry in general has got a lot of lessons it can take from what the book industry has done and what the news industry has done. And so in many ways, sometimes being late to the party does actually mean you've got a lot of stuff that you can leapfrog. So you can actually go a bit faster when you finally turn up and start joining in.
Late to the party, not late to the party. Right now, you're moving really fast on this, right? It's like a new membership thing every few months.
I feel so slow.
Really?
Thank you for saying that. That makes me feel better because when you grow up in news, the pace of magazines, I'm still getting used to. I'm like,
yeah, sure.
What do you mean it's going to take a month? Come on, we can do this tomorrow. I'm glad it feels like from the outside we're moving at pace because pace is really what we need to do. I mean, let's take your analogy of the runway. There's definitely a sense to me that magazines have been thinking about extending runways of print rather than thinking about what are the products of the future for the audiences of the future. Like many publishing organizations, we get obsessed by format, and consumers don't.
Mm.
Consumers engage with brands, and they engage with communities, and they engage with individuals who represent things they care about passionately. The sort of print versus digital debate for me is really actually unhealthy and unhelpful, because to move at pace and to sort of think about what we have to do, you have to think about the brand in an ecosystem, what Elle does and how Elle connects with its communities and how Elle builds a paid for proposition that people would be happy to join, will of course be different to what Good Housekeeping does and what Prima does. Prima just launched theirs, and it's got crafting and patterns at the heart of it. You get your pattern as part of your membership. They launched last week. Pace does matter though, because as you and I both know, the pace of everything is very fast. But actually, more importantly, you've got to get out there. You've got to stop having this perfect mindset of it has to be polished, fully completed. That's quite hard if you grew up in magazines where you have a month to craft this wonderful, beautiful edition. And actually, part of what we have to build in these communities and memberships is put it out there, get the feedback, adapt it, move on, put it out there, take the feedback, learn, listen, adapt, move on. And so that's quite a different, it's not just about the pace, to your point, Peter. It's actually culturally quite a big mindset shift. Being happy to not be perfect. That's quite a big thing if you grew up in the glossy world of magazines.
Is there such a thing as a formula for defining a good membership offering?
I think that there are some givens, given we have got legacy businesses where people have been paying to have a ongoing relationship. So we've had subscription businesses for a long time, right? And they're a core part of the offering. So you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So when we build our memberships, I'd suppose the sort of formulas that we kind of bring to bear is we think about some of the behavioral economics that underpins good subscriptions. So always have three, always put them side by side, always explain the sort of benefits of each product, put the roundel on the one that's your most popular, drive to it. So some of the formulas, because we have got this subscription heritage, do start from the sort of three-tiered approach. We don't allow people to buy the print edition only. That's always part of a bundle, because what you want to do is, with every good subscription business and membership proposition, is you want people to use more than one element of their entitlements. If you can get them to use two or more, everyone has a formula ultimately. So whether you're Spotify, back in the day, it used to be 2 shares and a playlist and you'd never churn, right? At the Wall Street Journal, it was 2 products and 5 stories within a certain time frame, and you knew they weren't going to churn. Everyone can work out what the sort of the formula for the customer engagement is, and I think it's different by brand and it's different by product, but all of those things are true, right? So the basic part of any good subscription. And then the other formula, I think, is everything that's back office or tech or the MarTech that supports you, definitely only build that once. So the formula is don't allow, even for the customer, the proposition feels different, or everything needs to be scalable, and you need to build everything once and kind of only ever sort of provide that flexibility at the kind of customer end, not inside your business.
People that buy this brand that will become a member are these certain kinds of people. And after that, it's the mechanics, which are maybe not quite as sexy as the branding type stuff, but they're actually probably more important in that sense.
But that's where I think, this because you've known me for years, but I grew up in marketing, and a career that spans over 30 years. God, I sound old in this industry. means that I've seen those internal dynamics that you just touched on change dramatically. And the great thing I think about the business we're in now is that marketing, or promotions as it used to be called in newspapers when I first started, we definitely sort of were the people that sort of sat between the editorial and the commercial functions, or the church and the state, and we were sort of not really welcome in either, but kind of brought in and stuff. But the thing that has changed dramatically is the culture inside these organizations has had to adapt. And what you just touched on there, where the mechanics and the kind of creativity, the marketeers now have a definitive role that is a better articulation of what a great partnership is with their creative and editorial and journalistic colleagues. Because really now, the great products that you build and the success of these businesses does require those departments to work together in a way that 30 years ago we really didn't have to. And we all had to bow at the feet of the editors. And the editors are still ultimately the joy, the brand, the reason, the raison d'etre, all of that great stuff. The reason we all actually work in the industry we work in is because we work on great brands that create great journalism, great editorial, and great content. But I think the most exciting thing for me, having grown up in marketing, is that now the marketeers have gotten a sense of equality with their editorial colleagues, because we know how, when we come together, how our roles actually really do build out these amazing memberships for our audiences because of, as you called it, the mechanics and the brand and the experience. Those two things are marketing meets editorial.
One of the things that I've noticed every time I've spoken to you, and every time I read something that you've written, or every time I listen to another interview, you talk about teams a lot. You talk less about I and way more about we. I get the importance of teams, but is there something uniquely in your experience that's made you go, oh yeah, that's the answer?
Oh, I don't know. Do I do that more than others? I mean, look, a little bit of it comes from the fact that there are lots of things I'm really bad at.
I was not expecting that.
And I'm one of those people that I get zero joy out of working on my weaknesses. And, at school, if they said, this is the thing you're not very good at, you need to work at that, I'd be like, well, I'll drop that subject, move on, right? I'm one of those people that naturally just wants to be the best I can be, and I get joy out of doubling down on the things that bring me joy and that I'm good at. And the two things for me are connected, which is always, all of my life. For me, I don't think about work and life. It's one thing. This is part of my life, and if I didn't enjoy it, I would be an idiot to do what I do, because I spend so much of my life and my time in work doing my job. So when I think about teams, I haven't really thought about this. I think about it being, I never want to be good at a spreadsheet. Literally shoot me now. I love having an idea. I love dreaming up things. And then I get really bored if I have to work through the steps of how we're going to go from A to Z. I like to just get to Z. I think the reason that I love teams is that I don't have to be good at those things. And I never understood why people employed people in their own image. Because if you had a room of people like me, it would be a disaster. If you go, right, here's all the things she's really bad at, let's now go and find people who are good at all of those things. You bring that together, and then I actually think you have the ultimate ninja. I always tell my team it's like the Avengers. They're all brilliant, but individually they can't save the world. And it's only when they assemble that you can actually save the world and not just be a green, miserable giant or whatever. For me, the reason the team is everything is it means I can be me, and everyone can turn up as themselves, and we can all be brilliant, but we can all be equally challenging, and we can be supportive. And it's also more fun because it's hard, right? To do the things we're trying to do, to turn around these businesses, to stop thinking about extending runways and to change the outcome, right? To build a new future for ourselves, we have to create our own luck, and you can't do that by yourself.
In terms of saving the world and this new future that we're building, where does print sit in that?
So I love the way that Douglas McCabe at Enders talks about artisanal print. I think it's a bit like quality news in newspapers. You know, the quality titles have really carved out their future. They know even if their model is donations in the Guardian or paid for subscriptions in the Times, you can see that quality news has a defined future. Magazines has always been defined as news and magazines as a category. And I think there are some elements of that. But as I mentioned before, actually, there's also books. So I think about it as a Venn diagram, and I think about where are the ways we're closer to books and where are the ways that we're closer to news and where do we have to be completely different and what's unique about magazines. Not for every brand, but for a large majority of brands where they probably came from a monthly rather than a weekly heritage. I think it's probably going to be harder for weekly magazines than it is for monthlies. But I think that we are a lean back experience aligned to people's passions, the things they care about, that emotional connection that helps us build memberships. I think you'll see, and you've already seen it, that many of the magazines that are doing well are growing both in terms of their overall subscriber base. They're probably not growing on the newsstand, right? And that's probably less about demand for that content and that format of a printed edition, and more that we haven't reimagined retail in like over 100 years. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is actually thinking about the future of retail and retail experiences. I know you had Jim on your podcast a few weeks ago. He's a real thinker in this space, and people need to listen to him a little harder than they are, in my opinion, because he's
Yeah.
calling out some of the things that need to be thought about. So I'm very positive about print. I actually think for the majority of our brands, not all of our brands, for the majority of our brands, it'll be a vital part of whatever that future membership proposition is. In many cases, if you go back to the craft of what we do, it still gives us that moment to be perfect in a world where everyone is racing and you have these sort of endless scrolls. It's why I think events and experiences are such a great extension of these brands as well, because,
Mm.
you know, you still need moments of absolute stillness, perfection, quiet, luxury, quality. I wish we were doing this in a few weeks' time, because then you'll see from mid-February you'll see the latest ABC results. You might be quite surprised by some of Hearst's performance in that space. So I'm quietly confident, but I also think it requires us to do things differently, and we're not very good at that. We need to reimagine retail. We need to religiously focus on the audience and really think about what's changed for the readers of physical magazines. What do they need in those products that's maybe different to what we might have done 20 years ago? We can't rest on our laurels at all. I think consumers are more demanding than they used to be, and that's a good thing. Ultimately, that makes our products and what we do better and even better. So I'm all for print.
Well, I just really wanted to ask you about the PPA role. You became chair of PPA, at the end of last year, December. What is actually the point in these kind of industry associations anymore?
Well, I actually think, I mean, it's a great question. I've never done one of these things before because I've always probably felt I've been in the fight, in the business, fighting for the survival of the business that I'm in. I actually think some of the fights that we're facing require the collective to have a stronger and better voice. Now, Saj Murali, who's the CEO, has done a really good job in her first 3 years on the PPA of, I think, giving the PPA real sort of teeth, actually, again, and connecting those members and bringing them together. She's done a great job of building out these steering committees and providing a purpose to a membership organization that's there for us as an industry. Um, But you're right. Why? Why does it matter? Well, actually, I think AI, we just touched on it. We are, it's not just the PPA, actually, it's also the NMA. So Owen Meredith, who's the CEO of the NMA, and also the Publishers Association as well for books. I think there are times in the fight where we need to think about the collective force and the voice that we need to have, particularly when you're dealing with new disruptive forces like AI. So, I personally, and I said this as I went in as the chair, I personally, because I come from a news background, I personally think that the job to be done is to figure out what are the things that we need to not just be collaborative and a strong voice on for the PPA. I think it's what does the PPA, the PA, and the NMA, how do we collectively provide the voices, into government consultations, into empowering our membership, because not every member of the PPA or the NMA has got the funds that some of the big players have got, like Hearst or News Corp, where I was before. And many of the things that are facing us are quite existential, whether that is the future of retail or whether that is how we protect our copyright laws in the face of the LLMs and what's happening there in AI. These things really matter, and there are times in our careers where sometimes the collective moment might be more important than the individual, or as important as the individual business hat you're wearing. And I feel that we're at one of those points at the moment where there's a part of it is about doing your bit, right, for the creative industry and the industry at large. And that's ultimately how Saj persuaded me to do it, because I'm quite busy and I was a bit like, oh, Saj, I haven't really got the time to do this. But she made a very compelling argument, and she's right, actually. And I see some sort of green shoots and some bright sort of hopes around, the CMA opening up its investigation into some of the anti-competitive practices of, say, Google and search and the mobile ecosystems, things like that. It's quite late, right? The fact that they're actually consulting on AI now around, with the PPA and the NMA and the PA, it feels as if maybe finally, collectively, we've learned some of the lessons of the disruption of the internet, where we basically collectively sleptwalked into some quite bad ways of working. And I feel that this time we're slightly better equipped and we have a moment to hopefully fight for the things that we all hold dear. So there you go. Hopefully, if you're not a member of the PPA and you're listening to this, and you should be, maybe you'll now join and help.
Thanks so much to the inimitable Katie Vanneck Smith for taking the time to speak to us. And don't forget, we have a write-up of some of the key takeaways from this interview on voices.media, or get it dropped into your inbox every Tuesday if you sign up to the Publisher newsletter, also on voices.media. This season of the Publisher podcast is sponsored by Memberful, a best-in-class membership solution where the content belongs to you, not to a platform. Find out more about how it can help diversify your revenue streams and connect with your audience at memberful.com/publisherpod. We'll be back next week with more insights into the people and products powering publishing's future. Until then, keep up with all things Media Voices by following us on LinkedIn and subscribing to the Publisher newsletter over on voices.media.